I had no idea that the location where I would have the most free time to study would also serve as the backdrop for the most terrifying experiences of my life. In 2019, I was able to secure a night shift job at St. Lily Funeral Home, a venerable and distinguished establishment in Woods, Ohio, that was well known among the city's wealthier families, thanks to a recommendation from an old friend of my uncle. I needed a job that would allow me to go to classes during the day because I was in my third semester of college. It may have initially appeared to be an unduly morbid profession. Nevertheless, the thought of supporting others during such trying times made me feel at ease. I thought my empathy might help, so I did my best to ease their load. The building itself appeared imposing, a colonial structure with gray walls. It never seemed strange to me to walk through those enormous, fragrant wooden doors. Maybe because I had never believed the apparition and paranormal stories I had heard. My supervisor, Mr. Smith, gave me an overview of my responsibilities on my first day, which included greeting the families, providing coffee or tea, setting up the floral tributes, and, most importantly, keeping an eye on those who stayed through the night. It was common for mourners to stay with the dead until daybreak rather than return home. It was a straightforward routine. Make your way to each visitation room, check to see if anyone is missing anything, and respond to all requests. I restocked supplies, cleaned the hallways when no one was around, and sometimes moved caskets to the chapels or the preparation area. Many thought the location was sinister. It represented respect and service to me. Although I have observed that some of my colleagues only do the bare minimum, I prefer to approach the families, talk to them in a quiet voice, give them tissues, and ensure that no one is left without a seat or a glass of water. Mr. Smith was pleased to have me on staff because of this. He claimed that one of the things that made Lily unique was my sensitivity. However, the other employees became resentful of that same trait. Some people muttered that I was a busybody and that I pretended to be better than I actually was by trying to assist more than was required. I didn't intend to make friends there, but it was a heavy atmosphere. My sole objective was to make enough money to pay for my tuition and, in the process, help those who were grieving. As the months passed, I began working the least appealing overnight shifts, the ones with little lighting and long, empty hallways. The cold seeped through the window cracks and the loneliness grew in the early hours. The temperature inside always felt cold, even though I was usually wearing a heavy sweater. The sound of people crying and the crackle of candles mingling with the distant hum of the air conditioner became familiar to me. I had to set up a room for a very small service one evening. The deceased had only been alive for a few months. The air became unbearably heavy when his parents arrived. Every nook and cranny was filled with an unfathomable sadness, as though the structure itself understood the unfairness of such an early departure. The only people there were close relatives and a few friends, who left at midnight with the promise to return as soon as daylight came. Around 3 in the morning, the parents also left, despite my offer to remain close to the coffin in case they needed anything, leaving the child alone with a palpable sense of sadness and silence. That feeling of loneliness struck me because I was accustomed to families keeping watch all night, praying, or whispering memories to one another. I reasoned that maybe those torn apart by agony would have rather slept than go through the nighttime ordeal in the funeral home. As I cleaned the hallways and moved some chairs, I saw that a room close by was still unoccupied. I heard hesitant footsteps and murmurs coming through the partially closed door. I made the decision to enter and check if anyone was in need. When I stepped inside, I discovered a considerably bigger crowd. Despite the large number of people, the room felt cold, and the air was heavy with incense. A coworker named Holly, who had just been hired, came to meet me. She simply shrugged and told me that the majority of the mourners were gradually leaving when I asked if she needed assistance. I lingered for a short while to check on anyone who might require immediate help or water. At that moment, I noticed a woman sitting in the last row who was notable for her stooped posture and her barely audible strangled sobs, which were filled with deep sorrow. She had her hair pulled back in a loose bun and was entirely white. In addition to her impeccable presence and discreet jewelry, she wore very elegant dark clothing, the kind that older women of high society choose for funerals. The most remarkable thing was how she covered her face with both shaky, wrinkled hands while sobbing uncontrollably, her shoulders trembling, despite the fact that she was surrounded by empty chairs. As though she wanted to keep away from everyone else, she stayed in the dark corner. In order to avoid interfering with the family's ritual near the coffin, I moved slowly closer. While some said their goodbyes and departed with weary steps, their closest relatives prayed in silence. The woman remained in her chair. She appeared to be stuck on that bench, engaged in an intractable internal conflict. She never gave me a look. When I noticed Holly talking to a burly man, I made the decision to let her do her job. Nevertheless, I was concerned that the elderly woman might faint or require help. She turned her head slightly as I took a few more steps, but I was unable to see her face. As if sensing my presence, she instantly turned back toward me by moving a few inches. The slight gesture unnerved me, but I made an effort not to interpret it as a rejection. A candle's smoke trail swirled in the air, creating ethereal shapes, and the room felt colder than usual. Abruptly, I heard Holly calling me from the doorway, asking me to stop by and eat dinner in the small cafeteria of the funeral home. Out of the corner of my eye, I noticed the elderly woman slowly getting up, possibly to go closer to the coffin. After eating, I decided it would be best to get out of her way and continue watching. Holly informed me outside that the deceased was a man in his late 70s who had passed away from a degenerative disease, and that the family was from one of Ohio's historic neighborhoods. Already, half of the guests had departed. After about 20 minutes of dinner, we went back to the room to make sure everything was in its proper place. We discovered several children wrapped in blankets, a few people sleeping on the benches, and the coffin encircled by just 3 family members who appeared to be whispering prayers. The mood had somewhat subsided. No more fervent prayers or frantic sobs as before. Then I noticed the old woman was no longer there. I looked around the room, assuming she had joined the group nearest the dead, but she was not there. After checking the lounge by the reception desk, I even looked into the adjacent corridor. Nothing. It baffled me because she had appeared too upset to depart without saying goodbye one last time just moments before. I didn't want to cause a scene, though. It's possible that she was just a friend who came to honor her and left in silence. I was about to leave when I noticed how fervently a woman was praying next to the coffin. She seemed engrossed, whispering something I could hardly make out. I stepped closer for a final glance because I was curious and had nothing else to do. I have no idea why. Maybe I was still tense from the old woman's choking sobs. I could see a portion of the inside of the casket from where I stood. On the pillow was a lock of white hair that shone in the dim light. My blood ran hot in that moment. I recognized the silvery, curly hair's luster right away. I stepped forward again and saw the hands folded on the still chest, thin, wrinkled, and knobby, just like the trembling hands that had concealed a face streaked with tears in the previous row. A chill went through my body. My legs swayed. I wanted to think it was an error, that the hairdo and outfit were just coincidences, but my inner voice told me otherwise. The deceased was the same person I had seen crying just minutes before, with her shoulders trembling with silent sorrow and her face buried in her own hands. I was unable to get closer. I was kept in the hallway by an unseen force, staring at that motionless body. I recalled that when I attempted to assist her, she had turned her head and returned her to me. The entire building seemed to be mocking me, as if death itself had arrived to remind me that there are no rules in her realm. The night passed in excruciating slow motion. Even when I was patrolling the other wings on an hourly basis, I kept my eyes open. I jumped every time I saw a creak or a shadow move across a wall. I was afraid I might catch a glimpse of that old woman walking the hallways, sobbing quietly and moving with a tired gait. My nape was always cold, as if someone were watching from the shadows. I repeatedly reminded myself to remain composed and that maybe my thoughts were deceiving me. The deceased's family members started to depart or prepare the body for transportation at first light. Trying to shake the dread that was churning in my stomach, I took a deep breath behind the building. Holly came out to inquire about my well-being. She said my hands were shaking and I appeared pale. I made a lie and said it was the cafeteria food. It was simpler than sharing what my eyes had witnessed, simpler than acknowledging that I firmly believed the distraught woman was the one inside that coffin. Doomed to wander the funeral home before her last journey, a ghost bemoans her own funeral. I found it difficult to remain calm after the incident, but something inside of me had changed irrevocably. The hallways were no longer secure. Every time an older mourner sat by themselves and started crying, my anxiety increased. My heart raced whenever I heard a strange noise, like a door slamming in a draft, a glass breaking in the cafe, or the whisper of the ventilation system. Everything appeared to be a warning that I might experience another unthinkable incident at any time. After a few weeks, I made the decision that I could no longer stay there. I dreamed about the memory every night, the body in the casket, motionless, followed by the white-haired woman in the back row, crying. I never saw that presence again, and none of my coworkers mentioned anything like it, but the memory of her image weighed heavily on my chest that I resigned because I said I needed more time to study. Since he appreciated my work, Mr. Smith accepted with apparent remorse, but I never dared to be honest with him. I believed that by quitting the job, I would be able to forget those experiences. That woman's sobs still chill my blood at night, but memory is a dangerous thing. I swear sometimes, even now, that I see a silver lock slip behind a doorway or hear footsteps behind me. Hallucinations or a warning that death is still closer than we would like to acknowledge could be the cause. I think an inexplicable force showed up that morning, as though to demonstrate to me how the line separating this world from the next becomes increasingly blurry, almost non-existent, during a wake. The memory of that silvery hair, the unceasing wailing, and the awful insight that occasionally the deceased might want to watch over their own departure still make me shudder. Ever since, whenever I walk past a funeral home, I get a little lightheaded and shiver, reminding me that there are things from which there is no way out. That night in Savannah cemented my belief that things happen in those final hours between life and death that are beyond our comprehension. I'm not sure if I'll ever experience anything like it again. My tale is not a work of fiction. It is the account of a time when I saw reality crumble before my very eyes. When someone asks me to explain my life, I can only respond, it was an experience of grief that defied reason. Death couldn't stop the sting of that sorrow, a never-ending groan that still reverberates in my head even when I close my eyes. On the outskirts of Mexico, 8 years ago, I worked at a funeral home next to a rough neighborhood that, at night, transformed into a labyrinth of shifting shadows. I took the job without giving it much thought. I had no other choice and needed the money to stay afloat. I had no idea that the entire space, including the long, dark hallways and the light-colored walls, would be used as a staging ground for events that would keep me up for months. As the evening receptionist, I only clocked out when I believed that everything had fallen into silence. I could smell the lingering scent of wilted flowers and disinfectant from the first day. There were a number of viewing rooms, a small altar, and a reception desk that looked out onto a long hallway with an oddly heavy air. Under a single incandescent light bulb that flickered whenever the power dropped, I sat at a makeshift desk. On numerous evenings, I observed a dim light switch turned on at the distant end of that corridor. Someone who is said to be watching over the dead until daybreak. In actuality, though very few dared to remain after nightfall. Just after midnight, they fled in terror. My responsibilities were straightforward. Before closing, make sure everything was in order, record visitor information, and collect any outstanding payments. With time, I was able to understand the night guard without using many words. He never displayed a gun in public and always carried a battered backpack with a coffee thermos. His eyes were steady despite their fatigue, as though there were horrors lurking around every corner of the city. He would offer me coffee on particularly calm evenings to help me relax, a considerate act that contrasted with the atmosphere of peril surrounding him. One night in particular comes to mind. Earlier than usual, the last wake had ended. Earlier than usual, the last wake had ended. The family, reserved individuals who arrived in fancy cars with tinted windows, disappeared as if they were escaping someone or something. I arranged documents and made sure everything was in order while I was by myself at the desk. From the main door, the guard nodded. It's time for the last round. We crept into the hallway after I turned off the lobby lights to conserve electricity. I heard a faint echo of murmurs as I passed the viewing rooms, as though unseen individuals were saying their final goodbyes. My skin pricked. I had learned to disregard some noises, assuming they were simply air whistles coming from the old building or perhaps a radio that had been left on in the cleaning closet. Felt different that night. In waves of panic, the resonance rose and fell throughout the corridor. I could practically see a crowd pushing, shoving, and blazing a trail through the shadows. My breath was taken away by a stab of fear as the guard came to a complete stop. I wanted to look, but he put his hand on my shoulder and looked at me with a deeper look than surprise, as if he was fully aware of what was taking place. He whispered, "Don't be afraid," and offered me a sip of coffee in a throwaway cup. He claimed that these things occurred and that I would eventually grow accustomed to the noises. His words confused me rather than calmed me down. Become accustomed to this? I pondered as the footsteps continued to reverberate in the distance, as though a terrifying scene were performed without any actors in sight. "We should go," the guard said, grabbing his backpack. There were no living things left inside, and the area was spotless. That line stuck in my head. As we heard the final echoes behind the door, he locked the entrance. I had a lump in my throat when I got home that evening. I could hear that crowd running every time I closed my eyes, as if it were being chased by something that didn't spare the guilty or the innocent. In the weeks that followed, new information emerged. As I looked at the seats, I heard whispers on the walls, darting shadows at the periphery of my field of vision. Even in mild weather, there was a chilling mist that rolled through the hallways. There was a viewing one evening. Even in mild weather, there was a chilling mist that rolled through the hallways. A viewing was suddenly canceled one evening. There were rumors that the family had been threatened. As a result, I spent hours there making sure the building was presentable for the following day. There was so much silence that we could hear the buzzing of neon lights. Then I heard a sob from a distance. It was so dim I thought I was dreaming. There was nobody there when I made my way to the refrigeration section of the main hall. However, the sobbing continued, sporadic, muffled, and seemingly emanating from a shadowy corner. The guard noticed my uneasiness and advised me not to look for the source because flashlights aren't meant for such things. Despite my heart thumping in my chest, I froze, concealing my fear. Horrible rumors about the funeral home spread. One man had taunted a killed enemy at the wake, causing a shootout between rival groups in the main chapel years before. It was said that armed men would eventually arrive to threaten the family whenever someone with too many enemies was laid out there. Employees kept a low profile, performed our duties, and prayed that we would not be hurt. The most violent dead, according to the neighbors, never slept and continued to wander the hallways, maybe sensing my mounting fear. The guard once informed me that not all of the footsteps we heard were from this world. He claimed that when death is so brutal, it can occasionally rip life away in the midst of excruciating agony. That pain becomes imprisoned within the walls. Souls are not always able to grasp. They have no body. Unaware that they cannot avoid their own demise, they continue to run. I had many sleepless nights with his words by my side. I survived my scariest episode 6 months into my job. They were mourning a young man who was allegedly a member of a dangerous group. After staying late, his family hurried out. I completed the logs around 11 o'clock and accompanied the guard to lock the hallways. I could feel the air getting heavier as I passed the main chapel. Each pew sat precisely in line, and a rusty chandelier hung from the ceiling. The silence was broken by a murmur, voices begging for assistance in unison. The guard motioned for me to keep my distance, that I tried not to panic when I caught a glimpse of a faceless figure crawling desperately between the pews. My blood froze in a split second. After locking up, we quickly made our way to the parking lot. I kept trembling as he locked the door. "What did he think that silhouette was?" I whispered. "Some things are better left unknown," was his straightforward response. More doors are opened by asking than by fear alone. I didn't sleep soundly the night before. Whispers, stifled cries, racing shadows, and moving figures in dimly lit pews. Every time I closed my eyes, it was replayed. I had the opportunity to relocate to Guanajuato and work with family 3 months later. I didn't think twice. Without turning around, I walked out of the funeral home after resigning. The guard escorted me to the exit on my last day. He patted my shoulder, said he hoped he would never see me again, and wished me luck. It's better for people to leave that place and never come back. With my heart racing, I thanked him and walked away, feeling as though I was leaving a place that held secrets that went beyond death itself. It took me weeks to get over the sensation that someone was watching me from a distance after I got to my new location. On the first nights, I woke up sweating and was positive I heard breathing at my ear or footsteps in my living room as I dozed off. I leaped to my feet, turn on the light, and discover nothing but the reverberation of my own paranoia. There were moments when I questioned whether those presences had followed me or if they had sneaked out of the funeral home with me. After a while, some peace returned. Even now, though, memories come flooding back when I close my eyes. Halls soaked with innumerable failed farewells, corridors laden with sorrow, the sound of footsteps devoid of life, and shadows running with nowhere to go. I don't talk about it. The majority of people either don't believe me or dismiss it as a hallucination brought on by fatigue. However, I am aware of what I witnessed, heard, and what remains in the shadows of my thoughts. Those angry and hurting souls are still there, imprisoned in a maze made of sobs and hasty farewells. I now see why the guard claimed that stumbling over their incomplete stories and failing to spot them in time are more dangerous than simply not seeing them. I haven't been inside a funeral home after dark since I left. Death and its eerie customs are something I respectfully avoid. Even so, that musty flower scent comes back to me whenever I hear a footstep in the shadows of my home or a whisper when I believe I'm by myself. How many people can still hear the invisible ones running, I wonder? How many guards still wear vacant stares and serve strangers lukewarm coffee? Particularly those where violence leaves permanent scars, never seem to be fully empty. Those shadows might still be looking for an escape they'll never find somewhere in that funeral home. Running through the dark, caught in a never-ending, terrifying escape attempt. In the summer of 1993, I was 16 years old when my parents and I traveled to Real de Catorce, a mountain village in a remote area of Mexico that is frequently hit by intense rainstorms. It had been my great-grandparents' home for many years, and on the few occasions I had been there, I recalled the peace and the old tales people told around a fire after dark, even though the total population was hardly more than 1,000. They claimed that people in Real de Catorce had seen unexplainable events that were transformed into legends and hardly spoken about. I, on the other hand, traveled with the excitement of seeing my family and the natural curiosity of my age for anything that seemed enigmatic or like it might be a horror story. The drive from the city took half a day. When I first arrived, I noticed that everything was even more quiet than usual. Half-starved dogs cautiously driving along dirt roads, adobe houses scattered about with weathered tile roofs. Despite being halfway through the year, the air was damp and nearly icy, and the hills were covered in a thick mist. My parents quickly clarified that the sad news we were hearing coincided with our visit. Someone on my mother's father's side, a distant relative, my parents informed me that we would go send condolences to the deceased man's family as soon as we had finished packing and said hello to my grandparents that afternoon. I was uncomfortable at funerals. The scenes were somber, with an air of pain and an odd energy thickening the atmosphere. However, I was forced to follow. I went with my parents, my stomach twisted with curiosity and my heart clenched. I dreaded seeing faces marred by sorrow or confronting an open coffin. Circumstances that, at my age, I could not handle. Almost at the base of a crag, in the oldest section of the village, was the house where the wake would be held. We saw a sizable crowd at the gate as we got closer. The vigil was held on a large patio that was only partially shielded from the sporadic rain by a dirty tarp. In the corners were overturned flower pots. There were kerosene lamps on makeshift tables, and there was an odd silence, as if people were only whispering because they had to. I stared in shock at the coffin. Only the base and walls were made of wood. There was no lid. My stomach turned as the man's body, which was about 40-some in size, lay fully exposed, his face swollen and his complexion pale. It was the closest I had ever seen a corpse, much less one that was so exposed. Depending on the depth of their grief, Relatives came and went, stood or sat on flimsy chairs, and either wept or remained silent. I continued to live close to my parents. Even though I remained close to my parents, I continued to notice the little things that added to the unsettling atmosphere. Around the coffin, a number of stakes were hammered into the ground. Twisted shapes of dry leaves bound with thin cords of plant fiber hung from each tip. They appeared to be talismans or odd symbols that I was unable to interpret. Some had limbs that were vaguely human, while others looked like crooked crosses. The idea that it was some sort of ritual or protection that I was unaware of sent a chill down my spine. As the afternoon wore on, more rain was poured by gray clouds. The next thing I recall is people rushing for cover while attempting to carry chairs, candles, and flowers inside as thunder shook the hills. Several men were already planning to lift and carry the coffin inside, even though it was still on the patio. The main room was too small, which was the issue. Many yelled that, in order to make room for the burial box in a corner, furniture needed to be moved. I heard an electrical transformer blow up in the distance during that commotion, and the entire block went dark. The only temporary illumination came from nearby lightning strikes and kerosene lamps that started to extinguish in the wind. With frightened voices blending with the thunder of the storm, shadow transformed the space into a canvas that stretched across the wet walls and floor. I heard the shrill scream of a woman in the midst of the funeral. My blood froze when I saw a wail so raw. As I tried to understand what had happened, I heard a lot of people talking at once and hurried footsteps. Then, as though everyone was holding their breath, there was a momentary silence. In a desperate attempt to announce that the body was not in the coffin, a man's voice rang out. The world sagged under my feet. People didn't believe it, so the shouts got louder. For them to check the ground and look everywhere as if the corpse had fallen out, someone bawled. However, there was no sign, and the rain continued to fall. I believed I heard a faraway child wailing in that confusion, demanding something I couldn't comprehend. Perplexed, I looked for my parents and discovered them conferring with one another, obviously terrified. They took hold of my arm and told me we had to go. We ran through the mud, and upon reaching the car, I saw more people escaping beside us. While my father started the engine and muttered that we needed to go back to my grandparents' house, wait for the storm to pass, and hear what explanations the uncles would give once things were more clear, my mother tried to calm herself. My ears rang with the child's sob once more, and I believed I heard her yelling that her uncle had fled into the night unharmed. The entire situation was too much for me to handle and left me in a panic. Rain battered the tiles, wind howled at the windows, and every thunderclap brought back memories of that dead face. It seemed ridiculous to imagine a corpse rising on its own. But I couldn't sleep due to agony. I had previously felt fear, but it had never been this intense or so deeply ingrained in the thought that something strange might be occurring. Head spinning, eyelids swollen. I woke up late the following morning. My grandfather came with news during breakfast. A woman who lived roughly 6 houses away from the wake had a commotion at her home. There, people had gathered, their faces displaying anger and fear. Rumor has it that the body had turned up on that patio, seemingly lounging in a garden chair. Words stuck in my throat and I went cold. How had the dead ended up in a different yard a few blocks away? Who had put him there? How had he moved, or worse? My family discovered through fervent looks that the body displayed decomposition that was far worse than what would be expected from a single rainy night, as though several days had gone by outside. The scene was made even more gory by the rain and moisture, which seemed to have sped up everything. Nobody was allowed to touch him without his consent, but they insisted on an explanation. Fearful voices claimed that the girl who sobbed during the wake vowed to have witnessed the dead rise just as the lights went out and run inhumanely, stiff-faced. The family was unsure of what to believe. Some believed it was the work of a madman who had moved the body for sinister reasons or who was trying to scare them. Others thought the child was convinced that something supernatural had happened, possibly because of the odd leaf figures surrounding the body. There were even rumors that the man had engaged in dark arts before he passed away, or that he had been the victim of witchcraft, which prevented his spirit from finding rest. There was a heavy silence in the dining room. According to him, They were employed to shield the living from any curses the deceased might have left behind, or occasionally to make sure the spirit did not rise from the grave, particularly when the death was thought to be caused by an unidentified force or the wrath of a saint. Legend has it that the ceremony was carried out very carefully and quite secretly, because failing to do so could result in the summoning of precisely what one wished to avoid. The news had spread throughout the village by the afternoon, even though the sky was still overcast. According to them, the deceased man's family and a few neighbors got together to return the body to the residence where the wake had taken place. They carefully carried it inside. It was reported that the family would reestablish the vigil, this time with a special prayer and the approval of the local priest, who seemed to be certain that evil was present. Many people, meanwhile, avoided the area because they didn't want to confront the corpse that didn't seem to want to rest. My parents decided that until things were resolved, it would be best for us to stay at my grandparents' house. But that night was just as horrible as the last. The wind continued to whistle through the ancient corridors even as the storm subsided. Unable to sleep, I tossed in bed, thinking I might see a staggering figure crossing the patio or hear footsteps outside. Even though I believed I could hear moans in the distance, I lacked the bravery to look out the window. Cold beneath the covers, there were rumors that, in the early hours of the morning, someone heard a knock on the door of the house where the body was reintroduced, as if the wood had been scratched by something inside. Some claimed that the sounds were just the wind. No one knew who to trust. In order to put an end to all of the chaos and rumors, my grandfather finally confirmed at noon that the family had made the decision to bury the deceased that very afternoon in a private ceremony. I was not present at that funeral. My parents refused to let it happen, saying I had already experienced enough trauma. We tried not to bring up the topic as we spent a few more days in Hiro Negro. However, it was evident from the neighbors' tense looks and whispers that the issue was still very much on their minds. She was either shunned or the subject of morbid questions. My family decided to depart as soon as they thought our visit to my grandparents was over. In addition to feeling relieved, we also had a knot in our stomachs when we left. I had a dream last night about cords and dry branches dancing around a coffin. Sweat-soaked and still unable to comprehend everything we had experienced, I woke up. Over the years, I think of that dark patio whenever someone talks about corpses appearing elsewhere or vigils where unexplained things happen. I hear the crowd's muffled screams and the girl's sob as she insists her uncle fled into the night. The memory of the suffocating atmosphere, the thunder resonating in the mountains, and the terrifying moment we realized the body was gone makes my skin crawl. I was never certain of what had occurred that evening. Perhaps there was a macabre act committed by someone who wanted to frighten people, some perverted deception, or something darker going on that I couldn't understand. All I know is that ever since, whenever dusk approaches, I occasionally imagine that stiff, rain-soaked figure wandering the shadowy alleys of Rio de 14, eyes vacant and a final utterance stuck on unresponsive lips. That wake left a lasting impression on my nights, my thoughts, and my realization that there are things in this world that can happen without any apparent explanation, making us feel a primitive horror that daylight cannot dispel. I'm not sure if it was fear, superstition, or a real event. Spread out,